Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Scots Whay podcast, and we're doing this from a rather wet Edinburgh Book Festival unfortunately, but I have with me the American writer Andy Davidson. Hello Andy.
Hi, Alistair.
And we're going to talk about your debut novel, In the Valley of the Sun. This was a book which Saraband, your publisher, sent me and said, have a read of this, we think you'll like it. So they obviously know me well, because I absolutely loved it. Now, I know how I would describe it, but I'd rather hear how you describe In the Valley of the Sun.
In the Valley of the Sun is the story of a drifter who is a serial killer who settles on a victim that is a little bit more than he bargained for. And this is a decision that unfortunately changes his life forever, not for the better. And along the way, in dealing with this horrible thing that has happened to him, he meets up with a widow and her son who are running a fledgling motel at the edge of the West Texas desert. And so it's a little bit like the film Tender Mercies meets Taxi Driver by way of Near Dark.
Yeah, well, that Near Dark was, we'll come on to the influences later on, but Near Dark was what I thought of when I read it, because it's set in Texas. It's real kind of heat about it, you know, it's the sweats, and it's literally blood, sweat and tears going on there,
right.
Without a doubt. And it is, as you've hinted at, kind of crime meets horror in that way. It's also a vampire story, so I'm really fascinated by why this was the story you wanted to write, particularly for your debut.
Yeah, well, you notice, like you notice in my describing it, that I eschewed the word vampire.
Right.
I think that's become habit at this point.
Okay, that's interesting.
But no, the idea was, this idea came to me. I was outside in my backyard painting the fence, and I got my MFA in fiction in 2004, and I got married in 2007, and I had not published, I had not written much. In 2008, I guess, I got married, and I had not written anything for about 10 years.
Right.
And it reached a point in my professional life, my day job, that I thought, this is not satisfying in the way that it should be. So it's time to get back to writing. It's time to do something. You're going to forget how to do it if you don't do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm out painting the fence in the backyard, and I'm thinking about this song that I knew when I was a kid. And it's the Dwight Yoakam cover of the old Johnny Horton song, Honky Tonk Man.
Right.
So the idea comes to me, thinking about these lyrics, I'm a honky tonk man, I can't seem to stop. I love to give the girls a whirl to the music of an old jukebox. This is what's on my iPod while I'm painting the fence.
Yeah.
And I listened to it a few times, and I thought, this is a really sinister song. There's something going on here with this guy. Like, what if this is a confession that it's not just about what he's saying it's about?
Yeah.
So I came up with this idea of a serial killer, that this was essentially his MO, was that he went to honky tonks, he picked up women, and he murdered them.
Yeah.
And at the time, it seemed like a cheap idea. It seemed like kind of an idea that I was going to pursue I think it started out as a script, and I wrote about a 110-page script. There was nothing supernatural in it at all.
Okay.
It was simply a crime story. And it was very much Tender Mercies and Taxi Driver, which neither of those films have too much in the way of vampires in them.
No, that's true.
The supernatural element came later, but that's essentially how it all got started, was just this idea for this character.
Yeah.
Yeah, Travis. Yeah.
Well, what I like about as you say, he takes on someone that changes his life forever.
Right.
And it's the consequences. So here he is, he's this, as you say, serial killer, apparently charismatic character, because he's a tremendous character, I think. I think of him almost like a cross between James Dean and Iggy Pop, and that's how I picture him anyway.
Wow.
But the idea of what you've done by bringing in that element, I think, is to give consequences to this to this character's actions. Was that kind of intentional?
Yeah. I think the idea of the supernatural here lets us as readers explore things that, maybe fiction that doesn't have that in it. We can explore some things. You can deal with the spiritual. You can deal with life after death, these sorts of things, without writing about vampires. Yeah, so I think horror lets us explore things that maybe genres that don't contain elements of the supernatural do let us explore. And certainly, like I said, you can explore the supernatural without horror. You can explore life after death. You can explore spiritual subjects. But I think all of us are ultimately afraid of those things. If we have belief, if we have faith, or even if we don't, there's possibly the fear of what happens next or the fear of death. And so horror, in a way, is a very good genre to blend with those things. Loneliness, isolation, a lot of the existential problems of people that we face. Horror kind of compounds those things. And there was a practical element to bringing that element into it too, just thinking about, like, for Travis, who's a serial killer, he's already going to be pursued by the police. He's got his MO as a killer down. What can I do that's going to make his life worse? But also, in making it worse, is going to create a compelling problem for him that the reader will actually, hopefully, empathize with him as a character.
And I think that's right. I think certainly I did empathise with him, and that's a difficult trick to pull off considering what the guy does. Right. And you also mentioned that you went back to some of the things you read when you were younger, and that's what I thought about. I thought about writers like Stephen King and Clive Barker and James Herbert and people like that I used to devour when I was younger. Absolutely, I loved them. And it certainly kind of fit in that genre, absolutely. Was that something that you kind of wanted to do?
Well, that was a big part of bringing in the supernatural as well. I read, when I was a kid, I read Stephen King voraciously. But the first book that I ever read that was written, I guess you would call it for adults, an adult novel, was Watchers by Dean Koontz. Then Dean R. Koontz. He's since dropped the
I didn't know that. I didn't know. I wasn't aware
he also had hair in those photographs, or he didn't have hair in those photographs back then. Now he has hair, so something's up with that.
Something supernatural.
So he lost the initial and he grew the hair. But no, Watchers was a book that I enjoyed, and that's definitely a horror novel, and so I've been around horror all my life, so it just seemed like a natural fit. Yeah, because I was reading. What I did was I took the script that I wrote, and I wrote a novel. I basically novelized my script because I knew. I'm never going to sell a film living here in Georgia. Right. I'm not going to be a part of the movie industry. So this was an exercise in teaching myself screenwriting, maybe, but it's not going to come to anything. And so I sat down over the course of a weekend and wrote out a very rough novelization of that script. And that novelization was nowhere near complete as the final book is. But that was the beginning of it. And then when I read it and was looking through it, I still felt like there's something missing from this. There's something not here that really piques my interest as a reader. And ultimately, that was horror.
Right. That was right. Now, you said you wanted to avoid the term vampire.
Yeah.
So why
that's tricky.
Is that?
Well, when I wrote this, vampire fiction was still, I guess to a certain degree, maybe it still is, I don't know, but it's certainly come back a bit into the realm of horror. Mm-hmm. But vampire fiction was the province of young adult literature at the time that I wrote this,
Twilight,
post-Twilight, So it didn't seem like a good idea to put in a query letter. Here is my 80,000 word vampire novel, and sure enough, it wasn't. I mean, I had about a dozen queries that were rejected. So I finally landed an agent by going and sitting down in a room face to face with one at a conference, and I think that the material kind of communicated something to her. It was like it's just that subjective click, But yeah, I definitely left the word vampire out of it.
Because since then, I think I've got my dates right, you've had things like Let the Right One In, Well, you've the vampire movie has become movie and books. I think
Sure.
become more of a kind of adult concern again.
Yeah, well, and films have always been there. Like, there's never been a shortage of vampire films. You know, there was that Neil Jordan was a Byzantium.
Yeah.
There's been Let the Right One In before that. You know,
True Blood television series.
That series was very popular.
Yeah.
But of course, Charlene Harris. I mean, what she was writing, arguably, is that horror. What she was writing, you know, and I don't know, but vampires at the time still were in that province of, you know, is it horror? Is it something else? Are we spoofing something? Are we writing, you know, supernatural romance? It's not exactly horror.
It become
you know?
a kind of romantic trope almost, wasn't it? That you could save the. Well, but no, that's interesting because there's a little bit of that in the Valley of the Sun. Because Travis eventually meets Annabelle and her son Sandy, and that changes him as well. I don't want to give anything away, so stop me if I am. But so, what can you say about that relationship?
Well, Annabelle and Sandy. I mean, there are elements of both of them have elements of me in them. I think the idea of being the child is definitely connected to me as a kid, and Annabelle is, I understand, you know, that sense of loneliness, that sense of spiritual isolation, and then, you know, I'm sure there are elements of me and Travis as well, but the idea of putting those three characters together, there had to be a lightness to the darkness of Travis. There had to be a side of humanity to him that I think Annabelle and Sandy bring that out. It's the broken family unit that he comes from, that he recognizes in them a little bit, perhaps, that in his mind, at least, I think he sees them as this can be the completion of what I never had. Yeah.
I think, to me, they kind of offer the chance of redemption to Travis. You know, we call it a saving of his soul or whatever you want to call it. But also they are necessary to make him, to have any empathy with him at all, because if you didn't have that, then what you would just have is a kind of out and out, you know, slaughter.
And I love that idea of, you know, a monster. It's, in some ways, it's a very old trope of the monster and the child, and the monster is compassionate and kind to the child. The child sees the monster and isn't afraid of the monster.
Going back to Frankenstein. Yeah, absolutely. This is something that came to me, it might be completely nonsense, but it's the imagery of the white rabbit. Is that significant in any way?
Well, maybe not.
I'm obsessed with Alice in Wonderland.
Well, no, there's no Alice in Wonderland necessarily there, but there is the idea of, you know, purity, whiteness,
Because you'd say that this is, I said blood, sweat and tears, it's absolutely caked in blood, isn't it? I mean, it's really...
Well, and this may not be so much of a spoiler if your readers are astute, which is essentially that anytime two cute little furry animals show up in a horror novel, they're
it's not going to end well.
They're not going to end well.
Not going to end well. So, we've spoken a little bit about the influences on it. Can you talk some more about the influences on your writing?
Sure. You know, I mentioned King, but one of the big influences on me as a writer has been Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
And you know, I think McCarthy is amazing. I've loved him since graduate school, which was when I read Blood Meridian. I first read No Country for Old Men when it came out in the early 2000s. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it because it seemed like a watered-down, slick version of what McCarthy had done before. It was sparse. It was fast. It was thinner than those other books. And
that's interesting.
And I came back to it about 15 years later, before I wrote this book. And I had seen the Coen Brothers film, which is a masterpiece. For all of those reasons, I love it now. It's fast, it's quick, but it doesn't sacrifice language. But there's an attention to setting and detail that's a hallmark of his work. But it's very much written almost to be a commercial novel when you read it. It feels like it's it's going to be a success, this book.
Yeah.
You know? So I was reading that book. I read and reread that book. His other book that has been a big influence on me was Child of God, which is a great book about necrophilia in the hills of Tennessee. So that's nice.
He's a cheery writer, isn't he?
Right. And, you know, movies have been a big influence on me. I've you know, film and
I felt this novel was very kind of cinematic. I could imagine it on the screen, absolutely.
well, and that's a high compliment to me. That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because I'm the term literary gets thrown around a lot with regard to fiction, and I have a very ambivalent relationship with that term because it can be both damning and praising.
Yes,
you know,
it's a difficult thing to describe what the person means when they say literary.
Right. And in my estimation, what you want is a novel that has a very quick plot, a very fast read, but does not sacrifice attention to language and character. So that's what I'm aiming for. So to me, No Country for Old Men really hit that spot.
Right. And it's interesting. It sounds almost as though you think Cormac McCarthy was writing that book to be made into a film.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that film, by the way, is a perfect marriage of literature and film, two mediums. The adaptation of that is extraordinary, I think. So yeah, it's almost they become almost inseparable in my mind sometimes. Yeah.
Talking of films, at the very beginning, there's a Night of the Hunter quote.
Yes.
Is that another film?
Both the film and the book.
Yeah.
The film is incredible. It's just one of the most. Shelley Winters, and directed by Charles Lawton.
Yeah.
It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, and I love it. And then I read the book. And the book was incredible too. And so I was reading the book again while I was writing this novel, working on revisions, and it definitely found its way into the book. I think there's a phrase that I stole directly from Davis Grubb, who wrote the novel. Sputtering hot coffee. I robbed that. But yeah, he's wonderful. So yeah, I think it was 1954 or 56, one of those two dates that he wrote that book. Because I think the film was 59, but I could be totally wrong about all of that. So,
because there are sections in I should say that in the Valley of the Sun, you jump back and forth in time.
Right, yeah. The structure of Night of the Hunter is interesting. I think it's divided into 4 books, and for the most part, it follows the 2 children who are main characters, but there are a couple of chapters that will suddenly turn and focus on characters that never appear in the book again. What you would think to be peripheral or minor characters, like a hangman at the prison where the children's father is executed. And one of the things I love about Lawton's film is that he does the same thing. He gives the hangman and his wife a scene in the film just as they have in the book, and ultimately it's creates such a sense of humanity in the movie. So yeah.
And is that with Annabelle and Sandy? Is that the kind of the humanity that you're bringing forward? You're not saying that things aren't all dark here.
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's a sense of hope with the two of them. I think they're at the beginning of the novel. Annabelle is being baptized into the Christian faith, and Sandy, as we learn, has been baptized in the past, and you get the sense that Annabelle's doing it simply to make her son happy, that this will make him hopeful about the future. He's lost his father, and so she struggles throughout the entire book with that notion of what is this all about? I mean, does this mean anything? What's after life? Do we meet, my husband again? Probably not.
Yeah.
And so I think she's trying to just create that hope for her son. But out of that, I think ultimately the love that grows out of their strife and their difficulties in the novel is a different kind of hope that's created, but it still maybe is.
Yeah,
so.
It's not. It's a kind of firmer hope, because it's actually a relationship between the two of them rather than what they've lost. Right.
At a certain point, a decision has to be made. What do we want? Do I want, from the boy's perspective, do I want a father? Do I want this idea of a thing, or do I want to protect my mother and look after her?
Yeah, because when with Travis being involved there, there's a sense of, oh no, don't do it,
Right.
he's not the man for you, believe me, he's not the man for you. And I think that's done really well, because you understand that it's not simply some kind of physical attraction or anything like that. The idea of a family unit is a very important one.
Yes.
To her, and the idea of bringing up her son in the right way.
Right.
And I think what she seems to do is gain strength throughout the novel to see that actually she's got the strength to do that.
Absolutely.
We've talked kind of a little bit about the horror in the book, but then the crime side of things, because we do also have our Reader and Cecil, our detectives.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about those guys.
They were in there from the very beginning. Reader is partly influenced by Tommy Lee Jones's performance in No Country for Old Men, but he's not exactly the physical type that I had in mind when I was writing the character. I love the Western genre, all the old John Ford films, and anytime you get Henry Fonda in the role of Wyatt Earp or Marshall, you've got a great character there. And so there's this sort of archetypal character of the noble lawman. The film Hell or High Water, Jeff Bridges' performance in that, I think, is very much that archetype. But I like the idea, too, of flipping that on its head and showing you that maybe there's great doubt and great fear inside this man. And Cecil is just... Cecil. He's just the fun sidekick.
He's the sidekick.
He's the small glimmer of comic relief in this book. Yeah.
The Martin Lawrence. It's interesting as well, I think, because I found that the characters and the way that they speak and the way that they move even and everything absolutely fitted the place. And you could, if I didn't know, you could tell that this writer, this is where they're from, because I felt it. Sometimes you read books, particularly I think set in America, because we're all very familiar with American fiction.
Sure.
And you can kind of tell it's not quite right. There's something a bit off. Did you find it quite natural to write these characters?
The characters, yes. I think one of the things that helps the authenticity of the book is the landscape and the setting, and having those details right. Sometimes I get asked the question of, you wrote a period novel, 1980 is the setting, and I always...
Is that a period novel?
It is, right. And I always think, well, that's kind of shocking to me, because I didn't try to write the 1980s. You basically just remove technology from the picture, and you've got the past. But yeah, I mean, as long as the characters... I forget what actor said it. I don't know if it was Harrison Ford that said it about Indiana Jones, that the character was the hat. Yeah. It's like, if you've got the jacket and the hat, if you've got the right outfit on the character, then suddenly you've got the character.
I know there's a version of Hercule Poirot in this country, which is David Suchet, and he says when he puts the moustache on, he is Poirot. I need the voice and everything it takes. So it examines kind of ideas of good and evil. I suppose it perhaps has to, given the subject matter. But as you say, it does. There are lots of kind of existential questions as well. With that serious side of the book, was that something that was very important to you?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I started with a cheap idea, and that's been a hallmark of me over the years. Is that I'll come up with an idea, and it'll be a cheap idea. So the idea here was. Seed of the idea was serial killer killing women in honky-tonks, chooses a victim, tables are turned, becomes a vampire. Sounds like a cheap idea. Along the way, I don't want to say the MFA inside of me, but because again, just like with other things, I have a kind of ambivalent notion about literariness and the MFA. Yeah. But I will say that I can't leave it at a cheap idea, I think. And in the case of this book, when it started getting fleshed out, I found that I had things to say about life, about loss, about grief, that I didn't have to say 10 years ago, and so they just naturally worked their way in.
Because to me, not simply pulp fiction, for want of a better term.
Right,
There is a lot more going on, and if you're not going to say it, there are literary, devices in there and things, examinations in there.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's maybe what attracted Saraband to it in the first place, because I think they do that very well. They did that with the Graham McCrae Burnett's.
Oh yeah,
book,
That's a great book. His body project.
And there are, unfortunately, in this country, crime is king. It's massive. I don't know what it's like in the States, but here
it's pretty much the king genre there.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah. So much so that actually Stephen King has started writing crime novels.
Really?
So yeah.
But that, like any genre, encompasses such a huge range of things and styles. And it was actually reading through Contraband, which is the crime imprint of Saraband, which you are on. It was through the novels that they started releasing that got me back into reading crime much more widely.
Right.
God, there's some really good writing out there.
Yeah.
There's some stuff which, it does what it wants to do, which is kind of, as I say, pulp fiction.
Yeah.
But there's other stuff which is examining it a whole lot more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just my observation from the last week and a half that we've been here in the UK, books are king in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, you see more people reading on the underground, reading on buses, reading in coffee shops here with an actual book in hand than you do at home.
That's
back
really
in the
interesting.
States. Yeah.
Because I think the perception is that isn't the case, even though we're at one of the biggest book festivals anywhere in the world, and it's always packed out.
Wow.
But that's really interesting to hear. So how is publishing in America? What's your experience of that?
My experience is pretty limited so far.
Right.
So I can only speak to what I've observed in the last year and a half since I've been invited into the tent, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it seems like publishing in the U.S. is balancing out. I mean, I don't know this. I haven't looked at the books, the ledgers or whatever. But there was a time period, maybe 10 years ago, when self-publishing took off with Amazon.
Yeah.
That it seemed like, the publishers are in trouble, bookstores are in trouble, everything's in trouble. And the publishers, I think, have kind of rebounded from that and figured out their way through it. And it seems like the bookstores are still struggling a bit. You see bookstores becoming more and more coffee shops and pop culture sellers. The ubiquitous little pop dolls. Big at Barnes and Noble, and so I guess it seems like it's trying to adapt.
Yeah.
But in terms of the publishing world, as I've seen it through publishing a horror novel, it seems like horror is a genre that continues to be a little bit marginalized.
Yeah.
And you have writers within the genre who write in a very specific niche, with smaller magazines and e-zines and smaller presses publishing their work for an audience that is out there and ready to read them.
Yeah.
But it's not what you would get with a big five publisher like Macmillan or Random House or anything like that. So it's a smaller audience.
Yeah.
And it's harder to break into those big five with a horror novel.
Yeah. So what are they publishing aside from? Are they publishing crime, or is that?
No, they're definitely publishing crime. Yeah.
What else? Because certainly, I think the difficulty in the UK is getting the literary novel, for want of another term, or the novel which doesn't fit into an easy category out.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be what they're doing. Is you're finding from the larger publishers novelists and writers who are exceptionally talented, and they're writing in these multiple genres. They're writing the literary novel, but it's touching on science fiction, it's touching on fantasy, it's touching on magical realism, it's touching on horror, it's touching on crime. And so even if, as this book is sort of a blend of crime and horror and literary, I mean, I think if you're wanting to crack into that world, that's the way in if you're writing in the genre, in a particular genre.
I think it is similar over here, and it sounds as though with the pressures on publishers and bookshops quite similar. But I do agree with you that it seems to be levelling out. I don't know, it might just be wild optimism, but it does seem to be. Certainly, I know that the larger bookstore in this country, Waterstones, has seen an upsurge, and it fits your description of selling cards and mugs and other things as well, but there are still books there.
Yeah.
And if you go in at lunchtime, there are people sitting.
Oh yeah. We went into a couple of Waterstones in London, and I was just delighted by how many people were in there. And we went into Blackwell's in Oxford.
Yeah.
Wonderful store.
Absolutely. And there's some great bookshops in this city as well. Absolutely, outside of the festival. Something which occurred to me, you mentioned it's set in the 80s, which it is. I've noticed that recently quite a lot of writers are setting their novels pre-mobile phone, put it that way.
Right.
Because it's a real plot killer. I mean, I'm not saying you do that, but I'm interested.
Of course not.
No.
Yeah, right? The funny thing is, that might have been my ignorance at the time, thinking I was, doing myself a favor by, eliminating mobile phones. But if you go out to West Texas, Highway 90, where this book is set, even today, the service is so spotty out there that I could have said it in the modern period.
Absolutely, it's a bit like the islands and islands of Scotland. Yeah,
right.
If you go certain places, you're not getting any reception. So how did you end up on Saraband? How did that happen?
The rights were sold to Saraband through Skyhorse, my U.S. publisher. So I just got an email one day and said, we've sold the rights. And I knew about Saraband through Burnett's novel, His Bloody Project. And, because I think right after Skyhorse picked me up, one of the first things I did was go to the bookstore and see what else are they publishing. And his was right there on the shelf. Which is a great book. And so that's really it. I mean, I didn't really have to do any extra work to get there. But once, I will say this about Saraband, I love them. Yeah. They're wonderful. Sarah Hunt's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once I was in, she's been a model of what you'd want to work with,
Yeah, absolutely. They're a terrific company, and I regularly get sent the books, and they know how to pick up a good book. Put it that way. Absolutely. So, and now here you are at the Edinburgh International Book Festival. And I know you haven't had your event yet. That's
right
this
tonight.
But what is it? Well known? Is it a well known festival?
I did not know of it, but that's no way to judge anything. My knowledge of things, I live a very bunkered life sometimes. I don't know, until a year ago I didn't know what was going on in the publishing world. Sure. And now I probably still don't. So no, I had never heard of it, but that doesn't mean anything. I think it is recognized, certainly within the U.S. publishing world, as a big deal.
Well, I know particularly that there's a Glasgow book festival called I Write, and it concentrates a lot on Scottish writers, but also sometimes European writers come over. But Edinburgh, you do get American names, and you do get bigger names coming over.
Well, as a writer here, I will say this. I mean, I've been to many conferences, many festivals, and they all think they're big. They all think they're great. I've never been to anything like this in the States.
Right, that's interesting.
We have in Atlanta the Decatur Book Festival, and that's a very good festival, very solid, large festival. But this is not. The scale is a little bit bigger, and it's very impressive. So what is next for you? I take it there is another. There is, yeah.
So what can you tell us about that?
I recently had the good fortune to sell another book to McDonald Books,
right? Which
is an imprint of Farrar, Straus, and Giroux.
Right. Okay.
So they're going to be publishing 2 more books of mine. So the next book that I've written already, and then the book after that, whatever that may be. So yeah, that's very fortunate. So the next book that's coming out is called The Boatman's Daughter, and it's kind of a swampy Southern Gothic, which is set in my home state. It's so funny to hear seagulls on a day like this.
Seagulls are everywhere.
But
don't
anyway,
look them in the eye.
Right. But yeah, that's what's coming next, and I'm obviously very thrilled about that, because
It's great. I mean, it's one thing I
Yeah.
think doing your debut, but to have a couple of other things already picked up is fantastic.
Yeah. So
And has there been any interest in making this a film or anything like that?
haven't heard a word.
Haven't heard a word.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope someone.
I'm interested in it.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
anybody out there.
Well, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I'm looking forward to your event later on.
All right.
And I have to say to everyone, check out In the Valley of the Sun. It's a fantastic read. You will not be disappointed. And we'll be back very soon with someone completely different. Cheers.